Okay, here we go. With God's help, we'll begin learning today the new book, the second book of the Torah, the book of Exodus. And here's a speech given by Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1992. 1992. Okay, good. Alva Elishmos with Israel, that's what it says about the second. These are the names of the Jewish people that came into Boim, which are coming into Egypt. It says in the Midrash, which Midrash is this? Let's have a look. In Shmot Rabbah, Midrash Rabbah. It says Midrash Rabbah. Okay, so how does the Torah portion start off? These are the names of the Jews that came into Egypt, right? Yaakov and all of his sons. And it says in the Midrash that this is talking about the future redemption. Ubehemshech Masbir Midrash, and it continues how it is that all the Jewish people, each one of the 12 tribes, is connected to the future redemption. Says the Rebbe, this doesn't make any sense. Haboy Mitzrayim, it says clearly, these are the Jews that went into Egypt. This is talking about simply about the Jews going into Egypt. Maybe you could say it hints at going out of Egypt. But it's not talking about going out of Egypt. Right, what does the Midrash say? This is only talking about the future redemption. And it's obviously not what it's talking about. It's talking about the Jews going into Egypt. How the Jews went down into Egypt, Begalus Mitzrayim, like it says in the continuation in the Torah, that Yosef died and all of his brothers, and the work got hard, and Paro made all sorts of decrees, right? And he says, let's kill all the male children. Only after a long time was the future redemption. The future redemption is 210 years later. Like it says in the Parsha, it's not in this week's Torah portion, Shemot, it doesn't talk about the redemption. And in next week's Torah portion, also Va'era, it also doesn't talk about going out of Egypt. When did the Jews actually go out of Egypt? In another 3 weeks, we'll read in another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we'll learn Parshat Bo. In the middle of Parshat Bo, there it talks about how the Jewish people really left Egypt. If so, Ketzad Omar Midrash, how can the Midrash say that this week's Torah portion is talking about going out of Egypt? It's not talking about going out of Egypt. Going out of Egypt, we're going to talk about it in another 2 weeks. This week and next week, all we're going to talk about is how terrible it was for the Jews to be in Egypt. True, next week it starts off with the first 7 plagues, but that didn't convince the Jews of anything. The Jews didn't want to leave. Even after all the plagues, only 1/5 of the Jews wanted to leave. They were afraid. So the Jews were basically in Egypt for the next 210 years. After this story, in another 2 Torah portions. So how can it say that this week's Torah portion, the beginning of this week's Torah portion, especially, is talking about going out of Egypt? Only 2 weeks do we talk about going out of Egypt. This is exactly the opposite of what our Torah portion says. That we went into Egypt. This week's Torah portion is talking about how the Jews went into Egypt, how the exile became worse and worse and worse. The Midrash Acher, there's another Midrash. It brings that the GEULA Mitzrayim, that the going out of Egypt was bishvil, in order, shelo shino bishvil. Sorry. Going out of Egypt was bishvil, because of. Bishvil means in order, but it also means because of. Shelo shino et Shimon. They didn't change their names. The Jews didn't change their names. Reuven, Shimon went in, and when they came out of Egypt 210 years later, they were still called by the same names. They use the same names. Reuven and Shimon went out. Alpis, according to this, maybe we can say that it's like this. Excuse me. Maybe that's what it means. Elu Shemot, these are the names of the Jewish people that went into Egypt. This is talking about on what merit. The merit, namely that they didn't change their names. Because of this merit, they left Egypt. By means of this, stira, and this is no contradiction to the simple meaning that they went into Egypt. Why? Because they went into Egypt, because it's hinted at that they went into Egypt with certain names, and because they held on to these same names, so therefore they left. Zel remez bilavad, but nevertheless, it is a hint that on the merit, on which merit did they leave Egypt? Because they didn't change their names. And this begins with now, Haboim Mitzrayim, that they went into Egypt. Azai then, Elish Yisrael, these are the names of the Jewish people, that they didn't change their names. That's a sort of an answer. But the first midrash that we learned that said that Lo Rak, not only because of they didn't change their names, but the first midrash we learned, it said that no, our Torah portion is talking about leaving Egypt. Elish Shemot ben Israel is telling about leaving Egypt. A geula meshech zman achad, that was only a long time afterwards, 110 years later. Eliyaterim, but even more, the names themselves, Nizkaru Khan, are mentioned here because of the future redemption of the Jewish people, not on the merit that the Jewish people held onto these names in exile. Kolomar, in other words, the Elish Shemot ben Israel, this is the names of the Jewish people that went into Egypt. This is talking about the future redemption, that this is a contradiction to what it simply means over here, that the Jews went into exile. And the Torah tells us that these are the names the Jewish people went into exile. Talk about exile. And the Midrash says it's only talking about leaving exile. There's another Midrash that says because they didn't change their names, on the merit of that, they left. Okay, that makes more sense. And it's talking about something that was going to come in the future. It was going to be, they're going to go. But according to the first Midrash, it says here, it's talking about them leaving Egypt. And what it simply is not talking about. It's not talking about what's going to be on the merit of which merit are they going to leave Egypt in another few. The first Midrash says that this Torah portion is talking about leaving Egypt. And obviously, if it says that in a Midrash, it must be true. But it seems obviously not true. I mean, there can't be anything more untrue than that. And we also have to understand the Fi Pirush Midrash, according to the Midrash, She'al Shem Geulas Yisrael Nizkru Khan, that it says that because of the redemption going out of Egypt, it's talking about Hari Afilu in Nimsa, even if you want to say that a boy Mitzrayim is talking about the future redemption, Dorish Hezbollah, you have to understand, why does it stress this in the sentence? Hari Khan Medubar Otis Euretus is talking about going into Egypt. Why even say that they went into Egypt? Just say these are the names of the Jewish people. That's all. Say these are the names of the Jewish people. And then afterwards, say the Jewish people were in Egypt and it got harder and harder. Even if you want to say that it's because of the names of the Jewish people that they left, why say over here, these are the names of the Jewish people that went into Egypt? Why have the word of going into Egypt? Say these are the names of the Jewish people, and afterwards it explains that the Jewish people were in Egypt and it got hard, got difficult. Even more, Al Shem Geulas Yisrael, that's talking about the redemption of the Jews. This refers to not only going out of Egypt, the country that was back then, a physical, political change, that they were first slaves in this country, then they became independent. Now they became a Jewish nation and they are independent. Right? That's true. That's also true, yes. But it's talking about also Geula Atida in the future redemption. That's what we talked about in the uh, in the Torah order we just finished learning. It is very essential for the Jewish people to know that going out of Egypt is just the first stage. That's not the beginning of Judaism, and that's it. That's just the first stage of going out of Egypt. But there's another stage of going out of Egypt that's the purpose of Judaism. Going out of Egypt when they went out physically, that was the birth of Judaism. But it's only to tell us that there's going to be a similar thing in the future. That's what we're waiting for. One of the 13 principles of faith. Moshiach is going to come, redeem the Jewish people. And that's the future redemption. Like it says in the Midrash, like we said before, but Bira Sheikhos, the Shem Yosef, the GEULA. What's the connection between, for instance, Yosef? Why was Yosef called Yosef? Because of the future redemption. Yosef Atid Kodesh Baruch Hu, because God is going to Hosif. He will return. He will increase the Goel at Israel and to gather the Jewish people together. Me Malchut Rish'ah, from the evil countries, the evil, dictatorships that they were under, just like they took them out of Egypt. Like it says, Yosef Hashem Shenis Yado, like it says, on that day, God will lift his hand up again and gather all the Jewish people together. And that's the future redemption. According to this, the question is now even stronger. Not only that, you read it, that we attach the going into Egypt to the future redemption. Not only that, going into Egypt somehow or other is attached to the future redemption, which will come thousands of years. We see, unfortunately, after how much more so after going into Egypt. So here we have a sentence which seemingly explains the worst tragedy that ever happened to the Jewish people. Never anything even vaguely similar. Worst tragedy that happened to Jewish people. All the Jewish people, for absolutely no reason, completely unexplainable. They had done nothing wrong. They were all put into slavery, all the Jewish people. Not like in the Holocaust when 1/3 of the Jews were living in Europe, and there was another third that were living in, who knows, in America and Canada. All the Jews were put into slavery into Egypt. Everybody suffered. Everybody suffered. That's the worst thing that ever happened. And the Midrash said, best thing that ever happened. This is talking about how going out of Egypt. And not only that, it's talking about something that's even infinitely better than going out of Egypt. And that's going to be the future redemption. That's all. That's what the Torah is talking about here. When it says the Jews went into Egypt, the worst thing that ever happened, it's not talking about the worst thing that ever happened. That's what it seems. But it's really talking about the future redemption, which is the best thing that can ever happen to all of mankind. How does that fit in? How does that work out? So the question of the Rebbe is how can it be that the best thing that could possibly be the future redemption is stated clearly in the Torah that it's the worst thing that ever happened? It says that it's when the Jews went into Egypt. It says, oh, that's talking about the future redemption. Let's say this a little bit different way. Maya Sheikhos, what's the connection between going into Egypt, going in of Yaakov and his sons, after 17 years of sitting in peace? Yaakov he went down to Egypt. He was sitting in peace, and then after that, Zaman Shachacha, they forgot the whole thing. The magicians of Paro and Paro himself, and they said, "Bo, hey, what are all these Jews doing over here? We got to do something and make sure they don't make a revolution." Suddenly, all of a sudden, the Jews became public enemy number one, and the Jewish people went into exile. GEULA, what's the connection of this, that the Jewish people were in exile and they were hated by everybody and they were slaves? They were like, fourth-class citizens. They were lower than the worst. And that says the Rebbe, no, that says the Midrash. That's talking about going out of Egypt. Not only going out of Egypt, it's talking about going out of the whole exile, the third temple, the revelation of God in the world. In addition to that, we also have to understand another thing. Here it says regarding all the matters of the Torah, and Torah means hora'ah, teaching. What can we possibly learn from this now? Thousands of years after the Jewish people left Egypt, etc. But so we have, let's say, two main questions over here. Question number one, this Torah portion says clearly the worst thing that happened to the Jewish people that could happen, happened. What was the worst thing? They went into Egypt. Says the Midrash, this is talking about the future redemption. You can't find any bigger opposite than that. This is talking about the future redemption. Question number one. Question number two, the Jewish people left Egypt. They left 3,000 years ago. What's this got to do with us now? What is it relevant to us now that we left on? And also that the future redemption is hinted at by the fact the Jews went into Egypt. Not because they suffered in Egypt, because of that, they're going to go out. No, the going into Egypt, that is talking about the future redemption. What's it mean? What does it mean to us? What does it mean to me and you? Here we go. Yesh Lomo, we can say the point of it is like this. You have to understand what does the Rebbe want to do? The Rebbe is trying to change our central focus in life from whatever we've been thinking about up to now to Moshiach, to the future redemption. Whatever you've been thinking about in your life, and people have been thinking of all sorts of religious people think about going to heaven, non-religious people think about success, they think about their family, they think about whatever. It could be that people who think about both things, going to heaven and success and power, whatever you've been thinking about, the best things, the best things in the world. That should be number two. The main thing you're supposed to be thinking about is Moshiach. What's going to happen with Moshiach? How can I bring Moshiach? What can I do with Moshiach? That should be our orientation. We have to get reoriented. that should be the central focus of our lives, is how to bring Moshiach. For everybody, everyone in the world, not just Jews, not just religious Jews, everybody. Moshiach is going to change. That's the name of the game. That's the goal, right? If you're in sports, you have to know what the goal is. In basketball, is a different goal than hockey. The goal is up there, and hockey, it's down here. You have to know what the goal is, right? What's the goal in chess? What does it mean checkmate? What does it mean? You have to know what the goal is. Here says the Rebbe, there's a goal of creation of life, and the goal is Moshiach. That's the goal. And somehow or other, this goal, this wonderful, amazing, beautiful, meaningful, precious, happy thing called redemption, that every fiber of creation, every moment of creation is going to be filled with meaning and with challenges, right? That somehow or other is hinted at the worst thing that ever happened to the Jews. It says clearly, these are the Jews that went into Egypt. That's hinted at the future redemption. Okay. Yesh Lomo, we can say a simple meaning like this. Kol Inyan, the whole topic of going into Egypt, is really the redemption. Why? Zeh shebeneim, the fact that between them there is a tremendous descent, and the Jews had to suffer. This is only external. Although but in the inside, how you read a gufa, the descent itself is not for the sake of, or in order to come to the future redemption, but even more, the descent itself is part of the elevation and the redemption itself. Maybe, let me take an example. I don't know if this is a good example. I'll get an example. Let's say a person wants to make a high jump, wants to jump up high. So before he jumps up high, the last second he crouches down and lifts up. So a person would say to him, hey, what are you doing? You're supposed to jump up high. What are you crouching down for? That's exactly the opposite of what you're supposed to do. You're in sports. I mean, you want to jump up high or not? If not, then just leave. What are you crouching down for? He says, listen, that's part of jumping up high. You want to jump up high, you got to crouch down first. Says, oh, come on. Where did you get that from? That's so ridiculous. That is ridiculous. You want to jump up high. You're telling me to jump up high. You're crouching down. You're crouching down because you want to rest. It's the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing here. We're here to compete and jump up high. Now, I want you to just go higher and higher. That's it. And stop this crouching down business. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. You want to jump up high. You have to get down. Crouch. That's part of it. Says the Rebbe the same thing. The fact that Jews went into Egypt, this was not really a descent. This was part of Chelik Mi Aliyah. This is part of the redemption itself. Until the Aliyah, the GEULA Miti Tvashlema, until the complete redemption. Mishum Kach, because of this, it says in the Midrash, these are the names of the Jewish people that went into Egypt, that really the going into Egypt was not crouching down for the sake of crouching down. It was because of the redemption. It was one part of this whole thing called the redemption. Shekavana so is also on the redemption from Egypt and the redemption in the future also. Because every detail of going into Egypt and the future redemption from of going into Egypt and coming out of Egypt happened to come after this. All the bad things, Gam Zman, even now, like the rabbis say, call them Malchut, Nikro Hashem, Mitzrayim, all of the kings that put us into exile, Nebuchadnezzar and Titus, and all these people that caused us trouble from all the generations, they're all called on the name of Egypt. The Pharaoh was the grandfather of all the Jewish haters. As Mazkirim Yetziris Mitzrayim B'Kol Yom. Therefore, we talk about going out of Egypt every day, because every day is just a remembrance of that exile and that going out that we had before. B'Kol Dor V'Dor, every single generation and every single day, a person is obligated to see himself as though he himself went out of Egypt. So we learn from this that also in our exile, we have to draw this redemption into Egypt. HaGeula Amitit Vashlema Telekaman, the total future redemption. Let's just do one more. The Yuven Zeh, we can understand. Okay, so we have to remember going out of Egypt every day, and every day we have to also go out of Egypt. And part of the going out of Egypt was the fact that we went into Egypt. In other words, going out of Egypt wasn't like a mistake from God, and then God let us out. Let us out. Right? No, it's not. There wasn't a mistake. We can see that God promised it to Abraham that that's what's going to happen in the covenant between the pieces. God said, you're going to go into a strange land. You're going to be strangers. You're going to suffer there. God over there said 400 years. And God, it says he reduced the sentence from 410 years to 210 years. From 400 years to 200. In any case, the Rebbe wants to say, no, it's not so. That the going in Egypt, that they went into Egypt was really a very good thing. And that which afterwards came all the tragedies and all the pain. The pain, that we can learn from also. But the going into Egypt, we have to understand the whole thing was something good. Yuvan said we can understand. The Hektam Abir, but Mishnah Achrona, the last, when it says in Parakama in Brachot, the last Mishnah in the first chapter of Brachot, and here it is. Here, look, let's have a look at it. Here, look. I brought it down for you here. Here's Mishnah at Brachot, right? When do we read the Shema in the evening? What time do we start? An argument. When do we read the Shema in the morning? There's another argument. Rabbi Elazar says, etc. Rabbi Yeshua. And then Beit Shammai says you have to lay down. In the nighttime when you say Shema, you have to stand up. In the morning when you say Shema, Beit Hillel says, no, you can do it however you want to. Rabbi Tarfon has his opinion. Okay, finally we get to Mishnah Hey, the fifth Mishnah in Brachot. Omer Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. Says Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. Now they say that Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah said this, he was like 18 years old. He was 18 years old. And that day he had been put into be the head of the high court, Sanhedrin, because there was a big argument with Rabbi Gamliel. In any case, he said this law. Hari ani kaben shivim shana. I am like someone who is 70 years old. 70 years. I say why? Because he was a reincarnation of Shmuel Hanavi, of the Shmuel Hanavi. Shmuel Hanavi died when he was 52 years old. So all the good years of Shmuel Hanavi, which was even, I guess, from the moment he was born, he was good. All those years were added onto his years. And even though he was 18, he was like 70 years old. Also, it says that his beard became white because people wouldn't give him honor because he was too young. So his beard became white, so he looked old. Nevertheless, I am like 70 years, and I did not merit, they should say, talk about going out of Egypt in the nighttime. Going out of Egypt in the nighttime means the third chapter of Shema. You should say the third chapter of Shema, which talks about tzitzit. And in the end, it ends talks about, I am God that took you out of Egypt. And tzitzits are not worn in the nighttime. So therefore, you might think not to say the third paragraph of Shema in the nighttime until Ben Zoma came along. And Ben Zoma said, you should remember the days you left Egypt. Kol Yamecha. It's a sentence in Deuteronomy. In order you should remember the going out of Egypt, all of the days of your life. Days of your life is talking about mentioning it in the daytime. When you say Shema, talk about I am God that took you out of Egypt, the third chapter of Shema, say it in the daytime. And all the days of your life, you should say it even in the nighttime. Okay, but the Chachamim say, and that what it says in the Torah, that you should remember going out of Egypt all the days of your life. The days of your life is talking about this world, and Kol Yamei all the days of your life is talking about even in the days of the Moshiach. You should also remember, even though the days of the Moshiach are going to be infinitely greater than going out of Egypt, and you might think you should forget it. No, even in the days of Moshiach, you should remember going out of Egypt. This is the Mishnah, right? So Ben Zoma comes and tells us that you should say the third chapter, going out of Egypt, even in the nighttime. And the rabbis say not only in the nighttime, but even in the days of the Mashiach. Okay, ready? Here we go. Back to this. Okay, the first, in the last Mishnah, in the first chapter of Brachot, that we say it, this also in the Haggadah of Passover, we say it. Omer Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah said, I am like 70 years old, and I did not merit that you should say going out of Egypt, and that's the third chapter of Shema, in the nighttime, until the Ben Zoma came. And he said, in order you should remember the day you left Egypt, all the days of your life, that what we just finished reading. The days of your life is the days, and all the days of your life are even in the nighttime. You should talk about going out of Egypt. In other words, read this third chapter of the Tanya. You should read that of Shema Yisrael. I'm sorry, the third chapter of Shema Yisrael that talks about going out of Egypt. You should read it in the nighttime also. And the Chachamim said, the days of your life is this world now, and all the days of your life you should talk about going out of Egypt, not only in this world, but also in the days of the Mashiach. Okay. Rashi explains, I am like 70 years old. I appear to be old, but he really was not old, because there came upon him old age when the day that they evicted Rabbi Gamliel from being the head of the Sanhedrin, and they chose Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. He was the head of the Sanhedrin, like it says in the first chapter of the Gemara, Talmud Brachot. And Oto Yom, that day, Ben Zoma said this sentence, that Kol Yamechecha. We have to understand, what is the connection between what Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said and the connection to the Mishnah that it says the day that he became the Nasi, he became the leader. He was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, became the leader, and this was the first law that he said. He became the leader, basically the leader of the Jewish people. He became the leader of the Sanhedrin, the High Court. The first law that he said is that you should say the third chapter of Tanya, talks about going on, the third chapter of Shema Yisrael. I'm sorry, make that mistake. You should say the third chapter of Shema Yisrael, which talks about going out of Egypt. You should say it in the nighttime. Mistaber Lomar, it means that since the Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, he was learning this in the Torah on the day that he was appointed to be the leader. So this is somehow or other attached to being the leader of the Jewish people. Just like it's an obligation, B'kedimus limud Torah b'inyanim hazaman, Garama, you should always try to learn Torah, the Torah portion, which is relevant to the time. So somehow or other, this idea of talking about going out of Egypt in the nighttime is connected to being the leader of the Jewish people, because that's when Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah said this, the day he was appointed to be the leader. That's when he said, the first thing I want to get clear, everyone, we're saying 3 chapters of Shema Yisrael in the nighttime, because that's what Ben Zoma said. We can say that Al Derech Zeh, this must be relevant somehow or other to every single Jew, and especially to learning Torah, talking about what's relevant to us, namely what? The redemption. So that's relevant to the words of Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. Also, I am like 70 years old. Why 70 years old? It says he was really 18 years old, and at that day that he was appointed, so there grew, it says, lines of white in his beard, so he appeared old. So why did he say 70? Say 80, say 100. Why 70 years old? Okay, so we're going to learn from all of this a very important thing about the Nasi, who he's the leader of the Jewish people, talking about going out of Egypt in the nighttime, and how that is connected to the Midrash that says that the first sentence in our Torah portion, which clearly talks about the Jews going into Egypt, is really talking about the Jews going out of Egypt. How is that? We'll learn, God willing, tomorrow, be or any an explanation. Now let's do the Yom Yom. 1 second.